Today we're going to feature something completely different. A Chihuahua lecturing on Hegel, Marx, and Herbert Marcuse and the CIA. This past week has been particularly stressful for me because I don't abide fools gladly. Certain people I can make excuses for because they know no better. But there are some of you out there, and you know who you are, who should know better. So we're going to talk about the challenge we're facing today with rational thought, pathological thinking, the source of it, its philosophical background. You know, I had a moron, and I can't describe him any other way. Well, perhaps I could. An ungodly moron who told me that philosophy had nothing to do with Christianity. He doesn't even understand the ancient Greek that the Bible was written in, the New Testament at least. Philo means to love. Osophy is referring to the very doctrines of loving something. It is the pursuit of truth, okay? And there is absolutely a Christian philosophy, which is why Christianity changed the world and revolutionized philosophy and created the most robust, legal, free societies that the world has ever seen. It created a revolution in justice and equity and liberty. So, you know, I have a colleague, if I can call him that, because he's really was my mentor, who holds a doctoral degree, who told me point blank that cultural Marxism is an alt-right conspiracy theory, even though every university from which he's graduated teaches critical theory of cultural Marxism. So today we're going to look at Herbert Marcuse in particular, also Franz Neumann and Otto Kirchheimer, and their role in founding the CIA. We're going to investigate a little bit as to why these ideologies have permeated the Secret Service in the US. It is my suspicion, strongest suspicion, that it is why this thinking was used in Vietnam, so to end the war by getting into bed with China and sending all our manufacturing there, the U.S. reestablishing its diplomatic ties with China as a result of Kissinger and Nixon making this deal with China to get out of Vietnam. And the foolishness, of course, of pursuing conflicts that are unwinnable on the one hand, and that aren't being waged honestly. In other words, that the government is waging war under the guise of one thing while actually doing another. So let's begin looking at Marcuse's relationship with the forerunner of the CIA. Question: what do you get if you take three Neo-Marxist intellectuals from the Frankfurt School and put them in the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the US's wartime intelligence agency and the forerunner of the CIA? Answer: some of those brilliant analysts of Nazi Germany ever written, analysis of Nazi Germany ever written, and a valuable lesson in post-war planning. Franz Neumann, Herbert Marcuse, and Otto Kirchheimer, leading figures in the creation of Marxist critical theory. And how often do we hear that today? all you hear in the press is about critical race theory. And in Marcuse's case, a rock star of the 1960s radical left, were Jewish émigrés who fled Germany for the US in the 1930s. Between 1942 and 44, the three friends were headhunted from posts in American universities by General William Wild Bill Donovan, the leader of the OSS, and reunited in the service of the US government. The reports they prepared on Nazi Germany, first declassified in the mid-1970s, have now been collated and published for the first time, edited by the Italian academic Raffaele Laudani. Together they form a rich and multi-layered collection of political essays that will be of enduring interest to students of military intelligence, Marxism, Nazi Germany, and the Allied effort in the Second World War. And I post the link to that article below the article. This will all be included in the notes to this vlog. We are all without excuse today. If I had had these resources when I was in university, I would have never had to bother to comb through the library as religiously as we had to in order to prepare papers. Every bit of information one could ever wish to have on political theory, philosophy, the corruption of our current political thinking is on the web, accessible to all. And yet all I read are postmodern radical leftist rants on the one hand, which is bad enough, but I expect it from them. But worse, from the so-called conservative right, I read the stupidest, intellectually devoid, low-resolution, idiotic memes that are unforgivable in intelligent political discourse, and the worst offenders among them are the head-slapping Baptist-Costal Bible thumpers. There's a saying, and I quoted this the other day when I got into discussion with one of these nuts. The more religion you see in the shopkeeper's window, the less you know is inside the shopkeeper. People that are truly moral don't go around telling others how moral they are. They just don't. Why? Because true morality is a result of awareness of one's own dark nature. I don't go around pretending that I'm better than other people or more moral than they are, because I'm not. And on I go here. The purpose of this text is to reconstruct and discuss how and why Herbert Marcuse, who lived from 1898 to 1979, a Marxist thinker and member of the Frankfurt School, placed such a focus on Hegel's dialectical philosophy and why this emphasis was decisive for his Marxist thinking. Even if an understanding of Marcuse's reception of Hegel is not reducible to this Marxist usage, this dimension, that is, Hegel's importance for Marxism, seems to be crucial. The historical connection between Hegel and Marx is well known. Marx's thinking was very much inspired by Hegel's dialectic philosophy of the human history and society. And a dialectic philosophy is where the power brokers to create two warring sides, and then they use the fact that they've created factions to dupe the people into going their way. That's a Hegelian dialectic. And if we're not living in that kind of dialectic today, I don't know what you could call it, because I've never seen Canada or the US or perhaps Great Britain and certainly Australia more divided than today, where there's people of two opposing camps who absolutely cannot see eye to eye and whose ideologies are absolutely incompatible. It is not possible that these two groups can coexist without going to war, because the one must become ascendant over the other, and that's exactly what the Hegelian dialectic is all about. The historical connection between Hegel and Marx is well known. Marxist thinking was very much inspired by Hegel's dialectic philosophy of the human history and society. But this connection will not be at issue for the following examination. Rather, the relevant question for the present study are, why did Marcuse make such an effort to highlight Hegel's thinking as especially important for his critical and Marxist theory? Not only as an implicit background figure for Marx and Marxism in general, how was this integration of Hegel into Marxist theory achieved? Even if some attempts had been made to explain why Marcuse put so much of his theoretical energy into Hegel, the question cannot be viewed as entirely solved. For instance, Douglas Kellner writes in his broad-ranging and important study on Herbert Marcuse and the crisis of Marxism that Marcuse never really explained why he involved himself in such intensive work on Hegel. 1. Thus the question remains, why and how is Hegel important for Marcuse's development of his Marxist theory during his lifetime? Marcuse wrote 2 books on Hegel's philosophy, Hegel's Ontologie und die Theorie der Geschnickelten. You'll see it written below. I don't speak German. I do speak a little Norwegian, but it's significantly different Sprach than Norwegian. That was published in 1932. And Reason, Herbert Marcuse, No Dialectics, No Critique. Again, the link to that below. So, in 1941, Herbert Marcuse published Reason and Revolution, Hegel and the Rise of Social Theory. In 1960, he added his new preface, which briefly explains the underlying basis of Hegel's philosophy and why Marcuse considers dialectics such a powerful approach to theory and politics. All genuine progress, he insists, requires the recognition of the negative as a social force in reality. So the entire point of Marcuse's philosophy is to negate. This is like we're living in a Monty Python skit of yes it is, no it isn't as an argument. But this is what Marcuse was driving at. And I read on, by Marcuse. This book, Reason and Revolution, was written in the hope that it would make a small contribution to the revival, not of Hegel, but of a mental faculty which is in danger of being obliterated, the power of negative thinking. Hear that. The power of negative thinking. As Hegel defines it, thinking is indeed essentially the negation of that which is immediately before us. What does he mean by negation? The central category of the dialectic? Even Hegel's most abstract and metaphysical concepts are saturated with experience. Experience of a world in which the unreasonable becomes reasonable and as such determines the facts, in which unfreedom is the condition of freedom and war the guarantor of peace. This world contradicts itself. Common sense and science purge themselves from this contradiction. But philosophical thought begins with the recognition that the facts do not correspond to the concepts imposed by common sense and scientific reason. In short, with the refusal to accept them, to the extent that these concepts disregard the fatal contradictions which make up reality, they abstract from the very process of reality. The negation which the dialectic applies to them is not only a critique of conformist logic, which denies the reality of contradictions, it is also a critique of the given state of affairs on its own ground, and of the established system of life, which denies us its of promises and potentialities. Today, this dialectic mode of thought is alien to the whole established universe of discourse and action. It seems to be to the past and to be rebutted. It seems to belong to the past and to be rebutted by the achievements of technological civilization. The established reality seems promising and productive enough to repel or absorb all alternatives. Thus, acceptance and even affirmation of this reality appears to be the only reasonable methodological principle. Moreover, It precludes neither criticism nor change. On the contrary, insistence on the dynamic character of the status quo, on its constant revolutions, is one of the strongest props for this attitude. Yet this dynamic seems to operate endlessly within the same framework of life, streamlining rather than abolishing the domination of man, both by man and by the products of his labor. Progress becomes quantitative and tends to delay indefinitely the turn from quantity to quality. That is, the emergence of new modes of existence with new forms of reason and freedom. The power of negative thinking is the driving power of dialectical thought, used as a tool for analyzing the world of facts in terms of its internal inadequacy. I choose this vague and unscientific formulation in order to sharpen the contrast between dialectical and undialectical thinking. See where he's going here? Inadequacy implies a value judgment. Dialectical thought invalidates the a priori opposition of value and fact. So in his philosophy, in Marcuse's philosophy, there is no value judgment. You can't say something is more worthy than another. It absolutely negates the foundation for civil society itself and the rule of law, and thousands of years of evolution of philosophical thinking, of true faith, of Christianity. It negates it all. A process in which subject and object are so joined that truth can be determined only within the subject-object totality. All facts embody the knower as well as the doer. They continuously translate the past into the present. Thus, the object contains subjectivity in their very structure. Now, what or who is the subjectivity that, in a literal sense, constitutes the objective world? Hegel answers with a series of terms denoting the subject in its various manifestations: thought, reason, spirit, idea. Since we no longer have that fluent access to those concepts which the 18th and 19th centuries still had, I shall try to sketch Hegel's conception in more familiar terms. So he completely negates the very foundation of evolutionary thought as it defines concepts such as God and the eternal. So that's exactly what is being foisted on us in the U.S. today. And any Christian that tells me that it's none of our business to discuss this and to warn the world about it, as well as our fellow Christians, is seriously deluded, and I ain't going to abide those kind of fools no more. You'll find all the notes below and the links to them. Search for yourself. Investigate these things for yourself. This ideology of critical theory is deeply embedded in our system of governance, and here's why.